My name's Jim Krogmeier. I'm from Purdue University. I'm actually an electrical and computer engineer, grew up on a farm. That's really why I'm so interested in farming. But because I was such a nice person, the people from the Ag and Bioengineering program there at Purdue and the Civil Engineering program at Purdue said I could be a courtesy professor, but they won't let me teach anything. They don't trust me enough to do that. But they would let me mess up their graduate students, which I guess that's what courtesy is. I mean, grad students always take it on the head. So the OATS Center, Open Ag Technology and Systems Center, this is a little more than 10 years old, I think. This was really a group of three people: Dennis Buckmaster at Purdue, Aaron Alt, who's a farmer in Indiana and also a staff person at Purdue, got together and thought, one of the reasons that we're having a lot of these compatibility issues is sort of just the lack of open source technologies applied in agriculture. And at the time we sort of started out doing that, it was a very novel thing. It's a little less novel thing now. I guess I could perhaps take a little bit of credit for that. Probably not a lot of credit, but a little bit. It's certainly being acknowledged that this sort of technology, this sort of way of figuring out how to do things and sharing the code and sharing the software and sharing hardware is a good thing. The OATS Center, though, is a little bigger than that idea. We sort of base it around open source, but we're really working in sensing and control and the hardcore things that electrical and computer engineers work on, robotics and these sorts of things. But there's sort of a data systems plumbing aspect of it that runs through the whole thing, and that's really perhaps why we're here, and that's sort of how we got our start working on that. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. This is the group of people that are currently working as part of this center, just to give you the idea that it's a fairly diverse group and a fairly diverse collection of schools at Purdue that work in this area. And so the projects that are worked on are quite broad, from food safety to ag engineering and to agronomy. Today what I want to talk about is I want to give a little report on what we've been doing for the convening grant activities. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about projects that are relevant to the work of this group, our point of view on open source data frameworks in ag, which is perhaps a little bit different than the kind of standard point of view sometimes, and then some data sharing or plumbing work that we've been doing for an ERC that Purdue is participating in, an ERC that desperately needs to share data among the researchers. And so we've found ourselves a niche trying to help that work. And so I'll describe that a little bit too. I am, an electrical engineer. I'm not a statistician, except for the electrical engineering aspects of it, but I'm definitely not a person that does a lot of surveys and things like that. So I don't have survey results in the same frame as the others, but we did a survey, as we were told. We did a survey, and I have the info here. But I wouldn't call our survey a statistically significant survey. We really face developers, so the people that we're talking to are people that work in kind of the ag industry, that do developing, that work for OEMs and work for co-ops, large co-ops and things like this. We have a kind of a philosophy of the farmer, but that's really only because we're farmers ourselves. It's not so much that we have large numbers of farmers to talk to. Certainly Purdue does, and there's a lot of people at Purdue that do very extensive surveys of technology adoption, what you're doing, mostly located in ag economics. That tends to be where they are found. So the activities of the things that we've been working on as part of this group is really participating in the webinars. That, of course, is kind of a given. But the very first thing we did was we rented a booth at InfoAg last summer and hosted a joint booth that we presented NAPDC information, and we did a survey there. And the survey was sort of a Qualtrics kind of thing that you could answer with your phone, and of course our result was that damn near nobody would do it. That was really what we learned, which I don't know. So we thought a different way to do it, perhaps, is to force people to do it. And so we thought, what event could we force people to do something at? And that we came up with was OatsCon. We would probably hold off, their cookies and their coffee until they'd done it. So I have the results from that, which I'll speak about a little bit. But we also have been working very closely with Ag Gateway on things like this fixing the soil health tech stack. There was a big virtual event that we helped to host there. NAPDC was presented at that event as well. At Ag Gateway's annual meeting down in Florida, a presentation was made and a working group was founded that's working on this sort of data sharing, especially for soil health things. Oh, we've also worked a number of other areas as well that are sort of data sharing in particular specific instances. For the Produce Marketing Association, that was one of the first ones we did, and also for in the swine industry, we've been doing some things. Okay, so to the survey. Let me have a little water here. And of course, it's just anecdotal, but sometimes anecdotal is okay, I guess. You get what you pay for from me, I guess. Well, maybe Jennifer doesn't agree with that, I don't know. Try to get it back, I guess. We almost never got it, I guess. Purdue has a very hard time nowadays, it seems, taking money. I don't know what the hell our problem is, but it's sort of one thing you'd think a university would have figured out. Okay, so the survey questions that were sort of relevant here were, first of all, we asked people that were at OatsCon, and we actually recruited our graduate students to be note takers, because that's the other thing we found, is that people don't like these sorts of things. So if we actually will talk to them and then transcribe what they're doing, we'll get a little better result. Examples of the lack of data interoperability, which hampers the effectiveness of your job in your industry. And of course, we got things like, oh man, everything's non-standard. Soils data is non-standard, plant input data, management tillage practices. We don't know how to record all of that. Field boundaries, lot numbers, product names, product IDs, data structures, financial barriers, lack of open data, calibration of yield, quality across tools. So it's sort of, in fact, sometimes things work quite well if you stay within certain tool, but they don't work terribly well if you try to import or export your data to another tool. So those were just a collection of gripes, and I'm sure that if we sat around here and did the same thing, we'd have an even bigger collection of gripes. We did some questioning along the lines of what sorts of data would bring value to you or your customers. We asked the participants that. We did sort of focus it a little bit about one of the things that we believe in the Oat Center that I'll try to explain to you so you'll understand a little bit the nature of these questions. It is sort of our contention, and this is the contention of people that sit, in these machines trying to farm, that the value of the data is often closely tied to its use to me in the immediate, So for some short-term logistics reason, if I have a reason to be recording this information or to be operating this app that I need while I'm trying to plant or while I'm trying to do something, as a farmer or an operator, I'm more likely to do it than if it's after the fact, if it's at night after I'm tired and been working all day. So we sometimes focus a little bit about what sort of things are logistics questions in the short term, and then what sorts of things are logistical questions in the longer term. So we kind of have that distinction here. Because we also kind of firmly believe that, at least from the perspective, actually it's probably not just the perspective of farmers, but and I'm thinking here kind of broad acre farmers, the farmers you see in Indiana and Illinois and Ohio and moving across Nebraska and even my people in Colorado. They're large scale farmers, really. They're farming thousands and thousands of acres. It's a logistics business. We're not agronomists. We take agronomic recommendations. We try to figure out what works best on our farm, but primarily the game is played by getting your crop in the ground when you need to get it in the ground before the weather changes, dealing with the weather, dealing with those short-term things, getting it harvested before the hailstorm comes. That's the thing we always worry about out further west from here. So we've asked these questions in this way. And the first question was, what short-term logistics decisions do your customers need to make with the data behind them? So one of the reasons is we sometimes like to build an app where we're getting some other data. We're doing it for a logistics reason so that they'll use it, but we're trying to capture other things as well. So some of the things that the survey people responded to were plant and application dates and timeframes, soil sampling. Could I get the soil samplers into the field right after the combines, so that I'm not doing this later and I forget and it's starting to freeze? Variable rate applications, these things are certainly logistics questions. Irrigation is a big logistics question. Maybe a little less important in Indiana, but you see more and more of it out there. So, it's, in spite of the fact that it's supposed to rain there, it intends to, there's a lot of folks that are saying, I really want to control the rain, so I'm going to irrigate even in places that wouldn't need to. So a lot of them are about those kinds of short-term questions that the farmer is dealing with at the moment. And if you can tag on some sort of other thing into an app that's useful, they might accept it, they might do it. Longer-term questions are things like, what are the impacts of sustainability practices in the long term? If I'm using cover crops, what's the upside, what's the downside to that sort of thing? I'm 11 minutes and 40 seconds in. I got 25, right? Yep, okay. I'm good. Of course, variety and genetics. And, I was very interested in the wheat board gentleman, because that's, of course, one of the things that we primarily grow out where I'm at. And, our question is always what variety, and then how does it interact with the drought we're in the middle of, the type of drought we're in today, because we're always in a drought. It's just a question of how damn bad it is. What does that do to the quality? One of the things we find, of course, and these are long-term questions, what should I plant? And how does it interact with the weather? That kind of thing. Quality question, is I often find that in a drought year, I have better quality grain if it's not completely shot. But in a very high productive year, my protein is very low. And so I'll get a ding on that. I can't keep the protein above the minimum, but I got 70 bushels per acre, and which is a very good yield out there. So, understanding that, of course, is a long-term question, and I think producers would be interested in those kinds of things. Also of great interest to producers are, understanding their benchmarks. How do I fit in? Is the rent I'm trying to offer going to be competitive? And the other thing to keep in mind, of course, is that producers are, they will work together in many ways, especially when it's questions of variety and that sort of thing. But when it's questions of my actual competitiveness to buy a piece of ground or to rent a piece of ground, I'm going to hold that very close to my chest. Okay, the next question here. Oh, well, we also asked them, what information sources would you pay for? People said things like benchmarking producer performance, weather service subscription, satellite imagery, other remote sensing tools, RTK, DTN, JD Link. So all of these that we kind of know about were mentioned as useful enough to pay for. What is your definition of a national ag producers data framework? One person said an authoritative data set that can be used for benchmarking, calibration, validation, and research. So, one person, statistical significance is none. Asked the same or later questions, key NAPDC challenges. People came up with ontologies, community management to support translation tables, so translation of data taken from different systems and maybe with different calibrations and different units, solutions and standards. So, these things are key challenges, but they are being met. I mean, we are working on these. Ag Gateway is working on these, and I think there's hope there, Perceived and actual barriers to the success of NAPDC. So some folks said the level of participation. How will you bridge those early gaps when the data is kind of incomplete? You've got a certain amount of, like anything, there's a certain amount of time to get it to where it's useful. And if you're too slow, it fails. I have many examples of that, of course, in my own damn career of failing. okay to fail, as long as you fail fast, right? Something like that. Truly fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. That's, again, something people are talking about. What pilot projects would be most important for NAPDC? Well, I didn't get a lot of answers there. One was research data collection. I mean, so one of the things that was kind of recognized by that group there at Purdue, and I think is true, just watching the way, research works at Purdue, is that we don't share our own data. We don't share our own data amongst ourselves. We don't share our own data inside the same darn group or the same project. We say we do, but we don't. We don't because in many cases, we don't know if it's right. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? You're going to share your data if you aren't sure it's right. Maybe I screwed it up, So you're holding on to it because of that. But you add up all of these little steps of not sharing your data, and ultimately, time passes, and the graduate student graduates. And once the graduate student graduates, for the most part, it's very difficult to reconstruct the history of what happened. So one of the things I do think is low-hanging, well, it's not, I don't know if it's low-hanging fruit, but if we can't fix our own house, we probably will never fix the rest of the world. So this is something I think all land-grant universities probably ought to be thinking about, and I'm not saying you're not. I think you are. Okay, so that's it. I hope that was worth the money. Maybe it wasn't. I'm actually not done, but I have 16 minutes. Oh, I did want to say, should I just take some questions, maybe?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions.
I have a whole bunch of slides, but they're not that important. You can certainly look at them, and they'll be shared with you.
Any questions for Jim?
Good Lord.
Oh, there's one.
Oh.
Hold on.
The question I have is, from the results, the mission, or the views of the group, what are the next steps? How are you planning to scale up, or to come up with a course of action for improving?
That's a good question. Well, we are working on these things, but we work on them, of course, from the perspective we come at the problem in. And our perspective is the developer, the software engineer, the engineer. So engineers have one way of looking at things. Others have other ways of looking at things. One of the reasons to bring a group like this together is so that we can hear each other at least and understand the differences there. We are building these data pipelines. And in the process of building these data pipelines, we're solving these problems of building an API that allows you to share the data. We're trying to do it, really, our main focus is to do it inside this ERC that we're working on, this National Science Foundation Internet of Things for Precision Agriculture. It's a ERC that's led by University of Pennsylvania. It's got Purdue, U Florida, and California Merced in it. And what we have built is a data system where you can design a sensor at California or at Penn. Penns tend to be the sensor people in this. They're nanotechnologists. And you can mail it to Purdue. You don't email a sensor, but you mail your package to Purdue physically. Or we mail something to them physically or carry it. Any of these places, and the software is there that if you put it out in the field, it will come up and log in and be there on our network. And so that data streaming is shared. And we haven't really solved the problem of what do you do with it. We've sort of backed away a little bit. We've kind of said, oh, I don't know how you're going to store it, but we're going to stream it to you. You get it if you want. If you don't, well, one of the problems, of course, is in a lot of things like this, the grant pays for the streaming, the grant pays for the research, but it does not pay for me to sit there on this data till I'm an old man and make it available. So that's kind of the issue. We're trying to get around it a little bit by saying if you want it, you capture it and save it. Now, the issue that I'm trying to figure out how to deal with at Purdue is that in our research farms, we are running a lot of experiments. Experiments paid for by other people, not by the National Science Foundation. Experiments that are important to a particular researcher in agronomy, say. Well, they're not into sharing their data just yet. This is the same problem, you know. They need to do it, and they probably are required to do it by the terms of their grant, but the way they're going to do it is going to make it hard to use. So here's my idea. I think it's a decent one, but you can tell me what you think. Most research universities have to run those experimental fields in a rotation. You know, just like you do a soy corn rotation or a wheat corn rotation out where we are, or a wheat corn fallow rotation where it's really dry. The researchers' rotation is trials and uniform treatments, because you've got to erase the blackboard between the experiments. So at the acre farm at Purdue, which is a couple thousand acres, about half is in small plot trials and half is in uniform treatments in a particular year in order to do that. So the idea here is the uniform treatments data should be public. There's really no reason we shouldn't be able to put sensors over that and help people that are trying to design sensor technologies to get at that data, because it's not really proprietary. You know, and it's, you know, and so what I hope to do is create a system that would allow me to do that. And then also be sensing the data in the trials as well, but allowing that researcher to control that data. So I'm going to try to automate the capture of it so that when the grad student is gone, it's still there. But I'm not going to try to take the control away from the researcher who's still trying to get the paper published, you know. Because it's foolish, I think, to try to operate completely contra to someone's best interest. You try to, it's jujitsu, I'm not a jujitsu guy, but you know what I mean? You try to, you know, he's coming at me, flip him over, something like that, you know? Sorry. Any other questions?
Oh, there's one more. Yeah, okay.
Jim, thank you for the presentation. So could you share a little bit about some of the best practices you follow to share data among your research group, but also interdisciplinary research groups?
Well, we're working through them still. You know, I'm not sure I'm completely without sin myself, but my best practices are to try to get it in a system, a data system early. So, in other words, you know, in our storage units, in these streaming systems. So, you know, this data that we've created for IoT for Ag, you can go back and look through it. In some cases, the data was not very good. I mean, we're still experimenting with sensors, and so many of the sensors, they're wrong. We're pretty sure they're wrong, pretty badly wrong in many cases. But we still need to make that available. And so you can go in and you can access that data now. And there's no particular reason that that data can't be accessed by anyone. So I guess my best practice is do it where you're at now. You can't necessarily go back and fix the old problems, but if you're building a system today, build it so that at least you can get the data. You know, I mean, for me, one of the original problems was I couldn't get my own grad students' data because the grad student had it, you know. So I guess it's one step at a time, little pieces. And if you can't access your own data, then you're part of the problem. And so to some degree, I'm probably still part of the problem, but I'm trying to not be.
We have one more presenter before panel. So, Ben.
All right, I'll do an update on the ADC's portion of the subaward, and just a little background on the ADC. So it's a coalition that was founded, we were trying to debate last night actually when we officially started, but the current entity was legally formed in 2016, and there were a few efforts and false starts before that. So been around for a while. It's a group that was comprised of industry, university, some producer groups at the beginning, that all kind of saw the same thing coming on. Farmers are going to have a lot of data. They're going to need to manage it. Everybody's got a different system. Trying to keep that organized and controlled, the access to it is going to be a big headache for growers. So we're trying to solve that problem. A lot of stuff Jim was just talking about on keeping track of where data goes when the grad student leaves. When we went through things, we kind of identified that on the university side, you had the same problem that a lot of the ag retailers and service providers were seeing. They'd have an agronomist that, they were working and they quit and went to work for the other company down the road, and lo and behold, all the data went with them. So service providers were having the same problem that the universities were having when the grad student graduates and leaves. So we kind of came to the conclusion that having some sort of central repository these entities could use to store and manage all that data would be a really helpful tool. At that point, a lot of the different service providers we talked to, they were talking about standing up their own IT infrastructure to have their own servers and try to manage this. There's a lot going on using different kind of commercially available tools that is a little less than ideal. So through that, we kind of came up with the little circles on the bottom there are the dual entity approach. So through a lot of the discussions on how governance would work and how different organizations would interact with it, we founded the nonprofit, so that's the little blue circle there, that would have a data repository, and that was the best mechanism for universities, research, that kind of interaction to work was through the nonprofit, to have that repository. So as everybody was starting to get more into the large-scale field research, partnering with growers and having to get the data from the collaborators, that was kind of the best way to go. Then on the green circle is kind of the next step that we've been working towards since then is actually a cooperative. So like you think of with a input supply cooperative or a grain marketing cooperative back in the day, this is really kind of the same idea, is putting the growers on a board in charge of the organization that's managing that data repository. So the farmer would pay to have his account, store his data there. Service providers, other commercial organizations would pay to have their own account. So everybody would be using the same infrastructure, the same storage system, but depending on who you were and what kind of business you were, you might interact with a nonprofit or you might interact with the cooperative, because through our research, we found that the IRS does not want a nonprofit selling a whole bunch of accounts to farmers throughout the world. So had to change things up a little bit there. So you can see who all is currently involved with the effort. There's a few more founding members that have had changes and moved on and came back and moved on. So still a pretty good group engaged, trying to keep pushing this forward. And really kind of, if you saw the talk yesterday, this might be a somewhat similar slide. Really just trying to solve that problem where the farmer's got so many different data sources that they've got to pull together, and then so many different people they have to get that data to, that they really need some kind of means to manage that. So it doesn't address any of the issues with different file formats and types and all that kind of stuff. Ag Gateway's out there working on a lot of that stuff. The goal here is really just to get everything in one pile so you know where it's at, and then can start permissioning access a little bit more coherently to it. So this is kind of the improved picture where you've got the farmer has his little digital key that he can control his kind of lockbox of his data. And he can choose if he's going to, share that or provide that to anyone, or if they just want to sit on it. That's not really what we recommend, but there are guys out there that are going to take that approach. So what we've been working on within our sub-award on this is similar to everybody else. We were one of the first ones that did the presentation in the webinar series, kind of talking about data storage, sharing control, that kind of thing. Then we've been using the grant to set up some pilot accounts. So the ADC group kind of pooled some funds a few years ago and stood up a proof of concept repository that we've been talking about there to kind of see how this works, and has had pretty limited use. So that was the goal here, was to get it out in front of a few more people, pick some different service providers, some different universities. We had hoped to get some crop insurance people involved. We kind of chunked that up by the people, growers probably sharing and exchanging the most data with, but the crop insurance people kind of backed out at the end, so we're still trying to get a couple people engaged there. But really just trying to get that system out there. We know it's a proof of concept, there's problems, it needs to be upgraded and that kind of thing. But trying to gather that feedback on what the system needs to do, what capabilities it needs to have, because we're really trying to walk this somewhat fine line on making that data storage a pre-competitive space, but not getting too far into what the commercial tools and other things out there are providing. We don't want to be an FMIS. We don't want to be generating maps, but we do want to be able to give the grower the ability to if somebody labeled the file L7 and they have no idea what that means. You got to be able to open it up, see what's in there, so you can organize it and store it and kind of manage things a little bit better. We did a survey and learned some things similar to Jim, that people just don't do surveys. We've sent it out to quite a few people, and we've had pretty limited responses so far. I'll go over them in a little bit. Again, probably not a statistically significant number so far. We're trying to push that out through some different channels to get a little bit more feedback. And it's really trying to get a little bit more deeper information on what machines people are using, what they're capable of from a technology perspective, how they're actually managing data currently. So really trying to understand some of that stuff to make sure, if nobody has machines that are collecting data, or the data they're collecting is, going to a different type of system that they can't get it to the cloud, understand, will there be interest in using a system like this, or are we just not quite hitting the mark? And then as a part of that, we're trying a little bit different approach, working with the Crop Life Media Group. We're going to organize a webinar to have a few poll questions in there and kind of discuss some of this stuff and make it somewhat interactive, or as interactive as you can with 200 people on a webinar. But to kind of discuss some of this stuff and kind of get the feeling from that group, because a lot of their participants will be the certified crop advisor, agronomists, kind of people of the world that, from what we've seen, generally do a lot of the data management on behalf of the farmer. There's not always a lot of farmers that are, neck deep in managing their own data. So on the survey responses, a lot of it was equipment capability versus utilization. So there's a lot of machines that get sold that are capable of variable rate, capable of section control, capable of a lot of these different things. And we wanted to get at how many guys are actually using that. Because if you have a variable rate capable planter, but you're not actually planting anything variable rate, that's probably a pretty good indicator you're not doing much with your data. So generally again, very limited sample size here, but generally if the equipment had the technology, they were using it. So, there was basically you could say, my machine's capable, I use it, my machine's capable, I don't use it, or my machine just isn't capable of that particular functionality. So with that, we saw, I think what people would expect: guidance, really high take rate, really high use of that. Section control, variable rate was actually pretty high. The only thing that kind of stood out was the telematics kind of logistics live monitoring tools. That one was, there was a little bit more people that said, my machine has that, it's capable, but I'm not using it. So that was the only kind of interesting thing, because we were talking about the results a little bit, and the equipment manufacturing companies and the dealers really like that functionality, but apparently the farmers aren't as interested in it right now. Then we had a few questions on data storage and sharing. Almost everybody's keeping a copy of something on their farm computer. And the other interesting thing is, of the options listed, everybody selected at least 3 of them. So that means they've got data in at least 3 different places, whether that be in OEM cloud, the computer, I forget what all the other options were. And then the other interesting thing is, if you are giving that data to anyone, how are you doing that? Are you hand delivering thumb drives? Are you emailing it? And it was kind of an even split between emailing, handing around thumb drives, and just saying, here's my credentials to Op Center, go get whatever data you need from my account, which I guess works, but I think a lot of people kind of cringe that, you hear stories from different retailers that they've got a spreadsheet of all their different grower clients, usernames and passwords for all their different equipment clouds, so they can go in and get the data when they need it, which is, from a data security and privacy perspective, not the way you want to do things, probably. Then the data collection, just which machines are they collecting data from? Again, I think it's probably what people would expect. The planter, sprayer, combine are the most there, but then also a lot of stuff going on with collecting soil samples, tissue samples, and a little bit of imagery. Then we did ask about their concerns. What concerns do they have with the platform? Why they might not want to put their data in there or share data? The number one was they don't know what the return is. They don't have a clear understanding of, if I put my data in this system, share it with this tool or person, I don't know what I'm getting back for it. The other stuff is similar to, I think we heard a little bit earlier on, some concern that it's going to be used against them. Another one that was kind of high on the list was concern that the company would be bought, sold, go out of business, some sort of entity change, that they were a little bit nervous about putting data into a system for that reason. And then, yeah, I think, like I said, that the data could be used against them at some point in the future is another one. So those are kind of the high points. We did get a little bit of information too about the people that filled it out. So it's kind of a range of farms. It was anywhere from 450 acres to 4,500 acres. The other interesting thing was they were all about 60 to 69 years old. So it is fairly in line, I think, with the census data on the age group of farmers. But so basically what that's kind of leading to is updating our system a little bit. Oh, our meeting's gonna end. Better pick up the pace. I only got 40 minutes. So this kind of is the simple diagram of how the ADC works. I guess simple and small font go together pretty well. The big blue block is kind of what we have today that we want to continue to focus on giving the growers that central repository that they can put all their raw data off their machines in one spot and keep track of it, so whether that came from a cloud, whether they've still got USB sticks and they're getting CSV files emailed in for soil samples, keep all that data in one place. Because that's one thing that we found when we were going through and kind of setting this up is a lot of growers will read that into a system and then maybe you can't get it back out, or when you get it back out, that system has done some sort of cleaning. They've done the smoothing and taken out the data points where now that isn't really that original file that came off your machine anymore. So if some other tool wants to use it, they might not like that because, well, it's been smoothed and I don't know if this is exactly the way I would have smoothed it. So we really think it's important to keep that original file somewhere. So 5 years down the road, when you need to do something else with it, you still have it. At the top, we've got all the different API connections. So, we're currently tied into Ops Center and Ag Leader and a lot of the main systems out there that farmers are using to make that easy to exchange the data from one cloud system to another. So we want to maintain that. And then we also want to add in some of the public data sources. So providing access to, the Surgo soil maps or Landsat imagery, different things like that are out there that, maybe farmers don't have a real intuitive way to go get access to that for their use. And then one of the big things that we've kind of identified that we want to add on to this is kind of that right block is taking all that data and reading it into a common structure. Because the example we usually use to explain this is, the guy goes out there, starts up his combine, he harvests half the farm, and it's all in one task file. But then he wants to share just one field out of that. How do you do that when everything is in that one file? So if we can read everything into a more common structure and then share that through some common APIs, it'll enable that more granular level of sharing where I meant to just share this field, or I meant to give somebody access to just the yield data, or I'm working with my equipment manufacturer. I want to give him my fuel consumption and engine RPM, but I don't necessarily think that they need to know what the yield was on the combine. So being able to provide a little bit more granular access to their data that way. Yeah, and then another big point we always talk about on this is the ability to get their data out. So that we don't want the farmer to be locked in. So we've got the ability after like 2-3 clicks, you can generate a zip file of every bit of data you have stored in that system and download it and close your account, and you haven't lost anything. So that's a big difference compared to a lot of the other systems that are commercially out in the market today on how do you get your data out. You get mad at them, you don't want to do business with them anymore, you need your data to go work with somebody else. We want to be very clear and upfront that we're enabling that, because that's a big driving thing that a lot of people feel like they get locked in to that. And then again, I think addressing a little bit on Jim's point with the university participation in this, we wanted to have a place to put all that data. So once somebody publishes their research paper, where does that data go that was used to generate that? I think everybody's kind of agreed that there needs to be access to that. Usually a taxpayer has funded that. So trying to provide some mechanism where that data can be posted and used for further analysis, You know, in my gateway work, we're always getting requests from different companies like, do you have a sample data file we can use to see how this API works, or how we can use these different standards? So being able to, you know, have a farmer say, for the greater good of the world, I will contribute my yield file, so that people out there in the industry can have it and actually see what real data looks like, without, you know, especially startups and other organizations like that trying to go find somebody that will give them that file, you know, just out of the kindness of their heart, is pretty hard sometimes. And also for, you know, I think a lot of the universities are offering the precision ag programs now, they want to give the kids in the classroom an actual data file to look at and open up and see how this all works and what's in there, and having something that, you know, is readily available publicly that you can kind of reference is the other goal there. So that's where we're headed. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to gather that feedback in this to understand how that all should work, what it looks like, what are the high priority items to knock off the list first, because like with anything, we've got the Christmas wish list of 400 features we want to develop and a budget for 2, so you got to choose carefully. But I think that is all I had. Oh, just some screenshots of what the system looks like. So the proof of concept that we have, like I said, it's basically a Dropbox with API connections into some of the other clouds out there. So you have your folder structure. We've got kind of a default folder structure in there to help, you know, kind of on the education side, get growers thinking about how they organize that data, what kind of folders you might have. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's kind of something we put in there to just get people thinking about how they organize it a little bit. We do have an audit log, so that's a big thing. So you can see who went in, who touched what file, and when. So you know what happened, who was in there looking at stuff. You should know who you've provided access to your account to, but this gives you that ability to see who was in there looking at your data. And this is the download all, so it's just, this is the download all in action. You can see the little wheel spinning as it's generating the zip file, but then that pops up and you can download everything. And I didn't have one in here, but probably the neatest thing that we have is a split view. So you have, basically what it allows you to do is on the left side, you choose, I want to look at all my ADC folders. And then on the right side, you say, I want to look at all the data I have in John Deere Ops Center. And then you can just drag it back and forth, just like you would with your normal file manager on your computer. Or if you have stuff on your hard drive, you just grab it and drag it and drop it in there, and it'll upload it to the cloud. That way, people have their data backed up in a cloud repository that's secure, and not, sitting in a desk drawer full of thumb drives, or on the one computer that runs the whole farm, that if that hard drive crashes, you've lost everything. So really trying to get people to move to that mindset of, we need to, even if you're not sharing the data, put it somewhere where it isn't at as high of a risk to be totally lost. And then I think what that means, a lot of stuff we've been talking about today and probably tomorrow as well, and just making that data easy to move around, easy to access however you want to, and then a little bit more control over the sharing and understanding who has access to it and when. We have the ability where you can give somebody access to a file or a folder for a period of time. So you say, yep, you can have access to this file for a month, and then after that it shuts off. So it's not this kind of perpetual thing hanging out there that they can come back anytime they want, knowing that they can go download it and have a copy of it. So it is a little bit, you can't completely shut off access, so you have to have that relationship set up with them, because being able to do this, obviously for the farmers, everything we've talked about, having that additional information is going to be a requirement going forward. It's going to provide additional revenue in a lot of cases, but you need to do that securely. You need to have it organized to be able to do all that stuff. And it should enable a lot of innovation. So if startups have a place where they can go and say, I want to talk to these farmers, I need data about XYZ. Same thing from the research perspective. That's another thing we've always wanted to add in there is, I want to do a study on runoff in, southwest Iowa. I can put a request out through the ADC system. Would be great to say, any growers in southeast Iowa that would be willing to contribute data to this project, and kind of help facilitate those interactions with growers. So that is the last one.
We have time for one or two questions. Any questions for Ben?
So my question is, you talk a lot about wanting to get this data. What is a good place? I'm from the university. What is a good place to start teaching people, the farmers, that this giving access to the data is important for them? But then, do we need something like a FERPA or a HIPAA or whatever it's going to be for ag data? Yeah, so and with regard to getting the message out there, I think, we've mentioned extension a lot of times here. I think industry as a whole needs to do a better job of educating the grower community on there is value to sharing. That's part of what we do is we try to do a little bit of education. It kind of tailed off during COVID, but we're trying to get ramped up again, doing webinars and outreach and other things like that to kind of highlight the value that you get, holding your data and not giving it to anybody, like what I think was mentioned earlier. You're not getting any value from it, but merging it with other data sets and providing that analysis is where the value comes. So I think, through the outreach, all the, universities that are doing a lot of studies, engaging with our industry partners to say, hey, yeah, we need to, amplify that message and get it out there to make people understand what the value is important. As far as like a HIPAA or something like that for data, the closest thing that I'm aware of is like the Ag Data Transparency Evaluator, where they were really trying to simplify all those data use agreements. So like I think somebody mentioned it earlier, that pops up and it's in fine print and you just hit okay because I want to get to the tool, right? And that's what everybody does on their phone. Who cares that they're logging everything you do and recording your whatever you talk about and all that stuff. But that system was kind of set out to say, okay, here's 10 key things that we know growers worry about, and are they addressed in this agreement? So it's not really rating the virtue of the agreement. It's just saying, did they address these 10 things that are generally important to growers, and then a little bit of a brief explanation on how they handle that. So I think that was kind of headed in the right direction, and it probably needs a little bit more to build on that. I know initially when that started, the hope was maybe we get to some sort of standard agreement that the industry can all agree to on this is how we're going to manage data, but I think there are too many lawyers in the world to go along with that approach. But yeah, I think, like I said, getting the understanding out there on the value of sharing data and then having some sort of framework to understand clearly what happens after I give my data to somebody, what are they doing with it, and what can they do and what can't they do, and what are the repercussions will be very important.
Ben, this is really fantastic. I appreciate all the great work your team is doing, and I want to ask a question that is both for you and also maybe help answer the question that Jim posed, particularly for the case where a researcher has been funded to do some research and needs to make their data available. It sounds like you're helping to provide one of the platforms where that could happen. I just want to make sure everybody else who's in that situation in this room realizes that at the National Ag Library, we do offer the Ag Data Commons, which is a good place to put your data if you need one. But we don't solve all possible problems. We can't take streaming data, for example. It's just too big at the moment, and we can only take data that can be made publicly available. And we do want to make sure that we know where the data is, even if it's not in the Ag Data Commons. So if somebody is using your repository to make their data available for this reason, so for example, it's in their data management plan that they're going to deposit it in your repository, are you able to provide them a digital object identifier so that when somebody goes to Ag Data Commons, they can read some metadata about that data and then follow the link to go to your repository?
So that's a future thing we want to do, and being able to link to Ag Data Commons is one of the things that we want to make sure we have that in there, so it's not redundant or
Right.
unclear on how that all fits together. So definitely something that we want to make sure that aligns. If there's data that doesn't fit well in the Ag Data Commons, maybe we can hold that a little bit better
Exactly.
and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Hey, Ben, just a quick question right here.
Yep.
I'm thinking about low-hanging fruit, and I think you mentioned it at the end of your presentation around like backup, right? Getting it out of the desk drawers. And I'm wondering if that might have some real traction, because it's like a business continuity or risk management issue. And like, I'm thinking back to early stage of my grad studies, and I realized all my data was on my back all the time when I carried it around in my laptop. It was really scary. I just wonder if that's an interesting proposition here, right? It's like really low hanging. It says just put it here, and it's like a safe place to store it, so that no matter what happens, you have a fire, a flood, your house collapses in on itself, or you change firms with it or manage it. It's just like a really simple value proposition that we're going to solve one thing, which is a business continuity issue. Does that have any traction in this community? Have we ever asked?
That's one of the main pitches I think we've made as we've been doing this is we obviously promote sharing your data, but even if you're not sharing it, just get it somewhere, that's modern and safe and a little bit more redundant than the desk drawer. And that I've joked that we need to hire some undergrads or whatever and provide the service that if you mail us your desk drawer, we'll upload it all to your account. It's kind of a painstaking activity, but I think there is something there for growers that do manage it that way, or if they got the one external hard drive, or we need to help them, I think, get that over that hump. And that's when because we have kind of two account types. One's grower and one's like service provider or university. Basically, the difference is how much it holds. And that's a lot of the discussions we have with like the service providers is, they're standing up their own IT infrastructure. They're trying to, make Google Drives do this kind of stuff and say, don't screw around with all that. Just use this system. You set your growers up with their own account that's linked to yours. And now you can have that marketing message that I've got all your data organized in a folder. I manage it for you. You get pissed at me for whatever I did. You can shut me off. You still have your account with all your data. And now you can go do business with whoever you want. And that's been one of the kind of core things on the cooperative side on how we think that's going to work is, going one farmer at a time trying to get them signed up is probably not going to work. But if you can get those service providers engaged and say, I'm going to include this, basically the nominal fee, that the amount of money they would have spent internally to stand up their own system or chase down everybody's laptops, just using that and giving their growers an account, they can just roll that into their package of, it's whatever for all the services I provide. This is part of that package. And then their data's backed up. It's securely stored. Anything the service provider generates that goes to them, they get a copy of it. And it's, a better relationship than, well, I have all your data, so you can't go work with somebody else.
I think I would like to say yes to the previous question. That's really cool. I think that's a great business model, but that's not really my question. But you might also think about working with kind of traditional cooperatives too. I think, it would be interesting to see what Land O'Lakes thinks and what CHS thinks about this. My question, though, is a little more direct. If we wanted to stream our data from our system this summer into your system so that you were the repository of it, would that be, is it kind of feasible to do?
I don't know
we would
why
have
it wouldn't.
to help
Yeah.
you, I think.
Yeah,
but-
there'd be some development to basically catch that and store it, but I see no reason why not.
Well, maybe a decent conversation later for what sort of work we ought to be working on as part of this thing we're doing here.
Yep.
Anyway, that was it. I just kind of wondered.
Yeah.